How's it going, everyone? My name is Mr. Johnson. I am one of the biology teachers here at Blaine High School. I'm looking forward to having you in biology this year. Congratulations. It's going to be fun. So, to start off, we're going to be looking at what is science, why do we do science, and how do we do science. To answer all these questions, I'm going to give one answer, and that answer is the scientific method. Pretty much everything that we're going to do in terms of science is going to be somehow related to the scientific method. So, in this particular situation, we are going to look at, sorry, I don't mean to have this bottom cut off here, but we are going to be looking at asking a question or presenting a problem, doing some research and making observations. We'll formulate a hypothesis, conduct an experiment, collect and analyze those results from the experiment, and then eventually we're going to write a conclusion about the experiment and communicate those results. Now this is fine and dandy. I like this model here. You can go on pretty much any website and type in what is the scientific method, and it's going to give you a slightly different approach to how the scientific method is done. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but this is just the general format that we'll be using in biology class this year, with an exception. And this is the exception right here. Sorry, I have to move my face. The scientific method is not just a linear scale. It is a process, and that is the key word here. The scientific method is a process. What is that process? Similar to like we saw on the last slide, we start by asking a question. But this stage here, we are going to continue to cycle through these things until we feel good about how much data we have collected. So we usually start by doing some research. We'll create a hypothesis or an educated prediction, and then we will do an experiment, go to the analysis stage, or really look at our data and figure out what we have. And we are going to continue to revamp our hypothesis, continue to do more experiments, collect more data, and analyze that data until we are comfortable with the conclusion. Because ultimately, the goal of science is we are trying to collect data. We're all about data. You have a statistic or you have an idea, show us the data, show us the statistics. We want to know about that. That's important to a scientist. And that's why the scientific method is important. If you say, this is what I think, and you have no data to back it up, whether it's science or whether it's anything else, people might not necessarily take well to what you have said. So, though this particular experiment here isn't going to necessarily change the world, I still like looking at it because it does a good job of highlighting some of the important parts of the scientific method and experimental design. 10 seeds were planted in each of the 5 pots that were found around the house. Each pot contained 500 grams of Pete's potting soil. The pots were given the following amount of water: 50 milliliters, all the way down to 250 milliliters in increments of 50. Because pot 3 received the recommended amount of water, which is 150 milliliters, it was used as a control. The height of each plant was measured at the end of the experiment. So now let's take a look. What was the problem being investigated? Let's create a hypothesis. What are we testing? What do they hope to find out? And what should a brief conclusion be? Now, the problem really is, if we're looking at it, how does amount of water affect height of the plant? Those are the two things. We're looking at what we're testing, or and then we're going to measure it. So we're testing amount of water, and we're going to measure the height of the plants. So we are on to our first term, which is hypothesis. I don't know about you guys, but I remember back to when I was in school. I think I learned about the term hypothesis in, like, I don't know, 4th grade, maybe 5th grade. So hopefully this is a review term for you guys. Hypothesis is a proposed scientific explanation based on a problem. So looking back at our last example, I specifically am going to see that, hold on a second, sorry. My hypothesis would be if we add more water, then plants will have greater height. Let's just say that's my hypothesis. Cool. Is it testable? Yes, we can actually test that, and it can be confirmed with experimentation. If we actually did the experiment on the last slide, which I did not do the experiment, so I cannot jump to a conclusion on if more water helped or if it didn't help. All right, a couple terms here. I'm just going to say this too. You might need these later on. Hint, hint. I have put them on the board, and I have used a one important word from each term. I apologize. It's not in the same order. For those of you that it may be bothering, I do apologize. But I'll go based off the order of the slides. So an independent variable is going to be the variable in which we are testing. So again, let's take a step back. What is a variable? A variable is something that we can change in the experiment. So again, looking back to our previous experiment, there's a lot of things that potentially could be variables. The independent variable, however, is what we are testing. In this case, we are testing the amount of water. How much water is going to be in each pot? That is our independent variable. Dependent variable is going to be the responding variable or the factor that may change as a result. And this is how I think of the dependent variable. This helps me. I think of it as what is it that we are measuring? Dependent is essentially going to be what is going to be measured because of the independent variable. So we add all this water, right, to different pots. What are we measuring? Specifically, if you look back, we're measuring the height of the plants. And a constant is something that remains the exact same throughout the entire experiment. Looking back, I'm sorry, I'm probably hurting your eyes at this point. There are a couple different constants that we can see in this experiment. One that I see is we used 500 grams of Pete's potting soil in all the different pots. That's good. That's the same the entire time. Both the type of soil we used as well as the amount of soil. Those would both be great examples of a constant. Some other examples could be we only used pots, we didn't use pans or cups or bowls as our device or our instrument to hold the soil. Another one could be, this one's maybe a stretch, but you could say, yeah, technically they're close to the house, so maybe the weather was the same because it says here around the house. That one's a bit of a stretch though, take it or leave it. All right, we're going to talk now about control groups. Control group is going to be something we use as a comparison. So in our last problem, the comparison was the recommended amount of water for those plants was 150 milliliters of water. So we are comparing our other four trials or the other levels of independent variable to that 150 milliliters of water. It's exposed to the same conditions, same soil, same holding device, same amount of soil, except for the variable being tested, which was amount of water. Very important, all experiments should have a control group. Experimental groups, something we're just going to be changing, which in this case was the amount of water, whether it was more or less than the 150 milliliters of water recommended. Also recommended is the more trials, the better. As your teacher, if you present to me an experiment and you have 2 trials, I apologize, that's not going to cut it. Lots of trials equals happy Mr. Johnson, happy other bio teachers. That's just the way it goes. All right, the last 2 items in the scientific process is collecting data and writing a conclusion. Now, here's the deal. With data, we have 2 types. We have qualitative and quantitative data. Now, I encourage you guys to just look at the terms when you are going through this. Quantitative looks like the word quantity, And quantity, those of you who love math class, shout out to the math department. Quantities are numbers. Qualitative observations are going to be more observations, or things that don't involve numbers is kind of an easy way to look at that too. Typically, we are going to take that data and show it somehow, whether it's a table or a graph. That is an easy way to organize it. It makes some of us type A science teachers very happy to see a nice and clean graph to read your data with. And after we have all of our data collected and organized, we're going to write a conclusion. And the type of conclusion we have you write in biology is a claim, evidence, and reasoning conclusion. Claim is going to be saying, yes, my hypothesis was right, or no, it was not. Evidence will say, here is my data to support it. This is showing that my claim was correct, or this is showing my claim was incorrect. Your reasoning would be some sort of research, usually, or scientific explanation as to why this is correct. So a scientific explanation might be as simple as, it turns out 250 milliliters was too much water, and that's why it killed the plant. Therefore, my hypothesis was incorrect. The more water you add, the less the plant grows. Something like that. Or my hypothesis was correct because I didn't add enough water, so it didn't have the full potential to grow. All right, so a couple examples here. I'm just going to go through these very quickly. If it has a number in it, it's going to be quantitative. If it does not, in this case, or for the most part, it's going to be qualitative. First one, quantitative. Second, qualitative. Third, quantitative. 4 and 5, qualitative. Very good. And here we go. One fun chance for you guys to show your knowledge, because Izzy is conducting an experiment to determine what time of day deer enjoy eating the most. She puts out 5 pounds of apples at 3 different times of day, 6 a.m., 12 p.m., and 6 p.m. She leaves the apples out for exactly 2 hours and then takes in the food. She records her results in the table below. Well, lucky you guys, even before you wrote a hypothesis, you already knew the data. So that kind of defeats the purpose of that. But what I would like you guys to do is critically think here for a second. What is the independent variable, the dependent variable, and one example of a constant in this experiment? If you need help, remember, I have one-word definitions to kind of help you on the backboard here. Constant, something that stays the same. Independent variable, something that is being tested. And dependent variable, something that is being measured. So, looking at this experiment, I'm going to start with independent variable. What exactly are we testing? We are testing what time of day is best for deer to eat. And in this case, it's going to be one of these 3 time periods: 6 to 8, 12 to 2, or 6 to 8 p.m. That is our independent variable. Dependent variable is, what are we specifically measuring based off of our results? And we are measuring the number of deer each day, which happens to be quantitative data because it is numbers. So, taking a look, it appears to me that the best time of day to find deer is nighttime. And say my hypothesis was, if food is put out at night, then there will be more deer. My hypothesis would be right. If I said, if I put food out in the afternoon, then there will be more deer, that would be an incorrect hypothesis. And constants, a couple examples of constants here would be, I have 5 pounds of food put out each time. I have apples as my only source of food. That's a constant. Another one would be, Ezzy does exactly 2 hours for each of her trials. Wouldn't be a very good experiment if one of them it was out for 15 minutes, the other one was out for 3 hours. That's just the way it works. And there are more, but those are kind of the 3 that I picked out from the experiment. So if we're looking at this, Essentially what we would eventually do once the data is collected, we would draw a conclusion. And we will practice claim evidence reasoning, writing conclusions. But essentially, I'm going to make a claim. Deer are more likely, or if I put out food, then deer will be more likely to come out of the woods. And then my evidence would be looking at the data. Deer were more likely to come out at night. The average was the highest for night compared to morning or afternoon. Then my reasoning would be I would have to do some research, and I actually did some research into this beforehand. I'm going to quickly pull it up. I believe it says right here. There it is. I highlighted it. The deer begin to move more at night. Studies show that fall deer movement peaks from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. and again from 4 to 8 a.m. So studies show that deer are more likely to move at those times. So I would use that as my reasoning. According to this, deer typically are more active at these times. So that's pretty much it for scientific method. I just have two more quick definitions that we need to go through, a theory versus a law, and then we are good to go. Thank you guys for being patient. So a theory is specifically going to be a widely accepted explanation of a natural phenomena. So for example, I always think of like something like the Big Bang Theory. There is, not the show, there's data that suggests that this might be the way the universe formed. And there's a lot of data, but maybe in 50 years, there will be more data that comes out that changes it slightly and makes us kind of adapt our theory. And our theory is essentially going to be, and I look at the last letter, the why something is happening. Why is there matter in the universe? Boom, there's a theory. Darwin's theory of evolution. Boom, why are there different living organisms? A law is going to be an explanation of what happens. Boom, this is what happens. Too bad. That's what happens. So I think back to ninth grade. Shout out to the ninth grade science teachers. Newton's laws of motion. They're very specific and very clear. There is no really waving from Newton's first law of motion. Something with more mass is going to have more inertia, and it is going to continue its state of motion unless an unbalanced force acts upon it. That's a law of motion. There's no really argument in the scientific community that it's wrong. It's confirmed by overwhelming data. All right. Other than that, we are good to go. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and have a fantastic rest of your day.